After Amalickiah becomes king of the Lamanites, he now goes after his two great desires. Number one, let's read it. Alma chapter 48, verse 1. And now it came to pass, as soon as Amalickiah had obtained the kingdom, he began to inspire the hearts of the Lamanites against the people of Nephi. Yea, he did appoint men to speak unto the Lamanites from their towers against the Nephites. And it worked. Look at verse 2. And thus he did inspire their hearts against the Nephites, insomuch that in the latter end of the 19th year of the reign of the judges, he, having accomplished his designs thus far, yea, having been made king over the Lamanites, he sought also to reign over all the land, yea, all the people who were in the land, the Nephites as well as the Lamanites. Satan is not content to rule over those who follow him. He wants you. He wants to rule over those who choose Christ. He wants to rule over all. He wants the Nephites. And not only does he want to rule over them, but number two, notice he says, he was determined, because of the greatness of the number of his people, to overpower the Nephites and bring them into bondage. He wants to rule over the righteous and hurt them. That's his goal. He wants to hurt the righteous, those who are the faithful followers of Christ. He really wants to hurt Christ. We will read later that he will thirst for the blood of Moroni, and Satan will thirst to destroy Christ. But he can't destroy Christ. And so he tries to destroy those who follow Christ, because that's how he knows he can destroy Christ. And so what does he do? Now again, here's number 3 on our list of strategies for Satan. He has an advantage, and he's going to play on that advantage. You don't remember who you were in premortal life. You don't remember what you did, what you were foreordained to do. You don't remember how you stood out among all the children of God and most likely became a leader. You don't remember that, but he does. He knows who you are, and he knows your strength. He also knows one other thing. Alma chapter 48, verse 5. And thus he did appoint chief captains of the Zoramites, they being the most acquainted with the strength of the Nephites and their places of resort, and the weakest parts of their cities. Therefore he appointed them to be the chief captains over his armies. And there's his advantage. He not only knows your strength, he knows your weakness. Now, weakness is part of this mortal existence. It is an essential part of mortality. We cannot become who we need to become without the battle against weakness. But he knows it, and he's going to take advantage of it. I remind you of this great verse in the Book of Mormon, Ether 12:27. If men come unto me, I will show unto them their weakness. I give unto men weakness, that they may be humble. And my grace is sufficient for all men that humble themselves before me. For if they humble themselves before me and have faith in me, then will I make weak things become strong unto them. Do you see how it's a part of mortal existence? My weakness is a gift from God. It's a blessing, because my weakness is an opportunity to partner with Christ and bring him into my life. But only if I humble myself. May I suggest that you will never defeat Satan unless you humble yourself. So today let's talk about fortifying the weak places. Moroni knew where they were, and he knew that Amalickiah knew where they were. Just as a foreshadowing, turn to Alma chapter 49. This is where the Lamanites attack. This is the first battle This is where Amalickiah attacks first. Now, where does he go first? Where does Amalickiah attack first? It says in Alma chapter 49, verse 1. It came to pass in the 11th month of the 19th year, on the 10th day of the month, the armies of the Lamanites were seen approaching toward the land of Amalickiah. Why are they going to Amalickiah? Why are the Lamanites heading to Amalickiah? Do you remember Alma and Amulek and the women that were burned and the children that were burned, and then the Lamanites came in and slaughtered the city? Coincidence or pattern? Amalickiah is taking the Lamanites back to where they've had success, where they know the Nephites have been weak in the past. Now, when they get there, Amalickiah has been rebuilt. Moroni put up defenses, and they were astonished at the defenses that have been put up. So where do they march next? If Amalickiah is not the weakness, where do they go next? Notice it says in verse 12, therefore they retreated into the wilderness and took their camp and marched towards the land of Noah. Why? Supposing that to be the next best place for them to come against the Nephites. So why did they go to Noah? Why would they go to Noah next? Read the next couple of verses. For they knew not that Moroni had fortified or had built forts of security for every city in all the land round about. Therefore they marched forward to the land of Noah with a firm determination. Yea, their chief captains came forward and took an oath that they would destroy the people of that city. But to their astonishment, the city of Noah, which had hitherto been a weak place, had now by the means of Moroni become strong. Now look in verse 15. As the city of Noah had hitherto been the weakest part of the land, therefore they would march thither to battle. Now, do you see the strategy? Lucifer knows your weakness. He knows where he's had success in the past. He knows your Noahs. He knows your Ammoniahs. He knows where you've been vulnerable in the past and where he's attacked you. But he also knows the Noahs. He knows the weak spots where he's most likely to get in. So allow me to say, I think the Book of Mormon is being pretty clear here. If you are going to defeat Lucifer's attacks, you must be humble. You must acknowledge that you have weaknesses. You must come unto God, acknowledging that you have a weakness. Partner with him and turn that weakness into a strength. I think the Book of Mormon is just waving its arms and saying, are you humble enough to recognize you have a weakness? Let me give two men as illustrations. Again, I don't mean to speak evil of one of them, but I just want to point out. Let's do this in the spirit of Moroni chapter 9, where he says, condemn me not for mine imperfections, neither my Father for his imperfections. Rather give thanks unto God that he hath made manifest our imperfections, that ye may be more wise than we have been. Allow me to speak of Oliver Cowdery in a negative sense, in that spirit, that we can learn to be more wise. I don't mean to speak negatively and condemn him, but rather a plea to be more wise than he was. Let me point out two men early in the Restoration were warned of weakness. One seems to be humble enough to have built up a fortress for it. One wasn't. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 23, verse 1, early in the Restoration, the Lord said to Oliver, beware of pride. Oliver, you have a weakness. Pride is your weakness. That's a warning. The Lord is pointing out Oliver's weakness. Pride was his weakness. Now, I love that in the Book of Mormon, Alma and Amulek, when they get out of Amalickiah, knowing the problem that caused Amalickiah, notice what it says in Alma chapter 15, verse 17. Therefore, after Alma, having established the church at Sidon, seeing a great check, yea, seeing that the people were checked as to the pride of their hearts, and began to humble themselves before God, and began to assemble themselves together at their sanctuaries to worship God before the altar, watching and praying continually, that they might be delivered from Satan and from death and from destruction. Verse 18, therefore when Alma saw these things, he left. They were prepared. So Oliver, you have a weakness, and your weakness is pride. Are you going to put a check on it? Are you going to check that pride? Are you going to build up fortifications to prevent the Lamanites from coming after that weak spot? And so you may want to ask yourself, are you doing the same thing with your weaknesses? So let me ask you, did Oliver Cowdery put up a check to help him with that weakness? There doesn't seem to be anything in Oliver's life, in the history that we have, where he seems to have put a check in place. And what was Oliver's downfall? If you read the case against him at his excommunication, it is pretty clear that Oliver Cowdery's exit from the church was because of pride. And the Lord had warned him early on, you have a weakness. Pride is your weakness. And Oliver didn't put a check in place. And eventually, he left the church. A witness to the Book of Mormon, the first baptized member of the church, walked away, primarily because of pride. Again, I don't mean to speak evil of Oliver, but rather to raise the issue as a lesson for all of us to be more wise. Now let's contrast Oliver with Joseph Smith. Section 24 includes the Lord pointing out that Joseph has a weakness. Verse 9, the Lord says to Joseph, in temporal labors thou shalt not have strength. In other words, Joseph, you have a weakness. You're not very good at temporal things. You're not very good at writing things down, Joseph. Case in point, we know about the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood. We know about John the Baptist. We know what he said. We know the circumstances. But we don't know anything about the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood. We know it happened. It's clear in the Revelations that it happened. But we don't know the circumstance. We don't know what was said when Peter, James, and John appeared. And do you know why we don't know that? Because Joseph didn't write it down. He didn't write it down. And why didn't he? Because he's weak in temporal things. He's not very good at temporal things. And there's an example of how it cost the church. We don't know how the Melchizedek priesthood was restored. We don't know the prayer that was uttered like we do the Aaronic priesthood because Joseph never wrote it down. He clearly had a weakness. But here's the difference. Tell me what Joseph Smith did to establish a check on his weakness. He hired a scribe. From the very beginning, Joseph Smith hired a scribe. He had been told he had a weakness. It was clearly evident and manifest. And yet, instead of brushing it off and just saying it won't be a problem, Joseph Smith checked his weakness. And he hired a scribe from the beginning. He hired people who had strengths in the area where he had a weakness. He was humble enough to acknowledge that he had a weakness and that he needed help. There, I would suggest to you, is one of the greatest antidotes to winning the war against Lucifer, is your humility in recognizing that God has given you weakness. It's a gift, but it only becomes a gift if you are humble. Let's read that verse in Ether one more time. It's worth remembering what the Lord said. If men come unto me, I will show unto them their weakness. I give unto men weakness, that they may be humble. And my grace is sufficient for all men that humble themselves before me. For if they humble themselves before me and have faith in me, then will I make weak things become strong unto them. Your weakness is a gift if you are humble enough to turn to him, acknowledge that you have a weakness, and seek his help. So, will you be like Joseph? Understand that I do have a weakness. Find it and check it. Let me give you a couple thoughts on how you might go about finding your weakness. Dallin H. Oakes gave a wonderful talk called Our Strengths Can Become Our Weaknesses. And he gave several examples of how strength can become a weakness. For example, intelligence. Someone who's really smart or really talented or very capable. Now there's a strength. Blessed with intelligence. Blessed with capability. But that intelligence, we've learned from the Book of Mormon, can often lead to pride. When they are learned, they think they are wise, and they hearken not unto the counsels of God, for they set it aside, supposing they know of themselves. Therefore, their strength is weakness. Almost without fail, if you want to identify your weakness, find your strength. What do you do well? And if you can see what you do well, see if you can see in what you do well a potential weakness. Is pride your weakness because you do something well? Some people who just love so passionately and so deeply, love is their strength. But love can be their weakness as well. Love can become a blind spot. So ponder, what is your strength? Let me give you a second way to identify weaknesses, and this one was taught to me by the prophet Joseph Smith. I love this quotation from Jesse Crosby. It is so eye-opening about the character of the prophet Joseph Smith. But in this is a message that has helped me identify my weaknesses. Jesse Crosby said the following of Joseph Smith. I went one day to the prophet with a sister. She had a charge to make against one of the brethren for scandal. When her complaint had been heard, the prophet asked her if she was quite sure that what the brother had said of her was utterly untrue. She was quite sure that it was. Remember that. She is saying, I'm positive that this rumor that they're spreading about me is false. Remember that, because that's going to change in just a minute. He then told her to think no more about it, for it could not harm her. If untrue, it could not live, but the truth will survive. Still, she felt that she should have some redress. Then he offered his method of dealing with such cases for himself. When an enemy had told a scandalous story about him, which had often been done, Before he rendered judgment, he paused and let his mind run back to the time and place and setting of the story to see if he had not, by some unguarded word or act, laid the block on which the story was built. If he found he had done so, he said that in his heart he then forgave his enemy and felt thankful that he had received a warning of a weakness that he had not known he possessed. That blows my mind. That makes me love the prophet Joseph Smith so much that he thought that. That was his thought process. When anyone ever said something critical of Joseph, whenever anyone spread a rumor or said something, instead of just dismissing it and blowing it off, Joseph would pause and ask, is there any truth to that? Is there any truth to what they're saying? Did I lay the brick upon which that was built? And more often than not in my life, the answer is yes. There's a little truth to it. Now am I humble to hear it? Am I humble enough to hear the truth in their accusation against me, even when they meant it as an insult? Are you humble enough to hear in the criticism of you a reality, a check, an insight into a weakness that maybe you didn't know you had? Occasionally, my wife has said things like, I'll wait until you're ready. We'll be having a conversation and I'm doing something on my phone and she'll say, I can wait. Now, that's a very, very kind way of saying what? Bryce, you're distracted and you're not listening to something important that I'm telling you. But it's so easy to just brush that off and not hear that, because those weren't the words that she used. She was very kind and said, I'll wait. But the reality is she was pointing out a weakness. Bryce, you are easily distracted. And I am trying to tell you something important. I need you to listen and not be distracted. Are you humble enough to hear in what they're telling you some great counsel about a weakness? Listen to the rest of this. Then he said to the sister that he would have her do the same. Search her memory thoroughly and see if she had not herself unconsciously laid the foundation for the scandal that annoyed her. The sister thought deeply for a few moments and then confessed that she believed that she had. Do you remember earlier when Joseph said, well, is it true? No, it's not true. Then don't worry about it. It won't stand. Well, I need some redress. And now when she's asked, think carefully. Did you not unconsciously lay the foundation for the scandal that annoyed you? And now she says, yeah. Yes, I did. I can see the truth in what they're saying. There is an element of truth. Then the prophet concluded. Then the prophet told her that in her heart she should forgive that brother who had risked his own good name and her friendship to give her this clearer view of herself. Now that's hard to do sometimes. Thank you for being critical of me and helping me see myself more clearly. That's not natural. When people attack us and say mean things about us, our defenses go up and we want to attack back. They're just dumb, or they're just wrong, or they're mean. They don't know what they're talking about, and we brush off what they just said instead of being humble and pausing and asking ourselves, is there any truth to what they're saying? Yes, there is. Now I know I have a weakness, and I know where Satan's coming. You need to remember what Moroni did at the very beginning of this war. He strengthened the weakest spots. He rebuilt Amalickiah, and he rebuilt Noah. Are you going to be wise enough to rebuild your Noahs? If you are willing to be humble, can I pass on some advice from then Elder Boyd K. Packer? He told a phenomenal story, and I pass it on to you. If you're willing to be humble, if you're willing to acknowledge that God has blessed you with weakness, and that you're willing to acknowledge that and to put a check in place so that it isn't become the source of your downfall. If you're willing to be humble, listen to then Elder Boyd K. Packer. Let me share with you something I learned from S. Norman Lee, once our stake president, then our patriarch in Brigham City. Shortly after we were married, I was invited to speak in a sacrament meeting. Patriarch Lee was seated on the stand. As the meeting closed, he said to me, "That was a fine talk, Brother Packer, but may I point out that the correct pronunciation of this one word is as follows," to which I replied with some impudence, "Oh, is that so?" Later, I felt very ashamed of myself and called Patriarch Lee and apologized. I thanked him for the correction and invited his continued interest. Shortly thereafter, I was called to the Stake High Council and on fairly frequent occasion spoke in meetings where Patriarch Lee was in attendance. Always he would compliment me and then add a correction or a suggestion. Always I tried to respond with sufficient appreciation to encourage him to continue his interest. Now listen carefully to what Boyd K. Packer now says. He's saying it to you, and I believe this is the message of Moroni. This is how we're going to win the war, when we have this attitude. Elder Packer continues. A desire to learn is one thing. An expressed willingness to be taught and to be corrected is quite another. I have found, and we have taught our children, that there is always a Patriarch Lee type, usually someone older and experienced who knows much about the challenges you face. Whether they be spiritual or temporal, it is worth inviting them to help you. While there is great value in seeking a personal interview to receive counsel, what I am talking about is something else. It is an unstructured process with counsel and suggestions offered in bits and pieces, and you responding with thanks. Can I wave my arms? Can I throw that out as one of the Book of Mormon's chief suggestions on how to win this war? That suggestions about your weakness are going to be offered in bits and pieces, and you responding with thanks. Elder Packer continues, that process survives only when there is a genuine desire to learn and an invitation to those who can teach and correct you. That invitation is not always in words, but more in attitude. Once when I returned from a mission tour totally exhausted, my wife said to me, "I've never seen you this tired. What is the matter? Did you find a mission president who wouldn't listen?" "No," I replied, "it was just the opposite. I found one who wanted to learn." Many will say they want to learn, but feel threatened if there is the slightest element of correction in what they are given. He wanted to learn. That president now sits in the council of the 12 apostles. I have learned that few respond when that kind of teaching or correction is offered, and fewer still invite it. May you learn a valuable lesson from Moroni and build up your weak spots. Had Moroni done that, I think this battle, this war, would have been very different. The reason the Lamanites succeed is because the Nephites let them in. But initially, they repelled them because they had fortified their weak spots. I encourage you to read that first part of Alma chapter 48 and be humble and ask yourself, am I doing this? Am I humble enough to acknowledge that there are chinks in my armor and that an invitation to others would help strengthen them? An attitude of being grateful when people point out a weakness in my armor. There's no way we win the war against Satan without that essential element. Humility. A willingness to ask that question. Where am I weak? What is my Amalickiah? Where is my Noah? Where is Satan going to have success? And how do I rebuild that? There are many Patriarch Lees in our life who will help us strengthen those weaknesses if we have that right attitude. It starts there. We saw that my covenants and keeping my covenants will repel the enemy. And now we add another one, humility. Humility is essential in conquering the battle against Lucifer. He's coming after your weaknesses. Are you smart enough and humble enough to acknowledge that you have them? And are you willing to ask for help to build them up? It is my testimony that God gave us weakness as a gift. It connects me to Christ. It compels me to seek Him because I recognize I need His help in building this up. May you, like the prophet Joseph Smith, be humble enough to hear what they're saying, hear what he's saying, and build up the weak cities. Then we will be prepared for what's coming. And I testify of that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.